Welcome to Werezilla's Retrospective. I'm your host, Werezilla. Wait, can I start this video with that opener? Because this isn't a traditional review, as the subject of this video is a series of movies that were conceptualized but ultimately never made. Of course, looking at unmade movies can be interesting to look at what could have been, and think about how those ideas manifested in movies and shows that do end up seeing the light of day. And with long-running monster characters like Godzilla and King Kong, there's plenty of ideas that were tossed around by filmmakers. Keep in mind, this video is not a comprehensive list of all unmade movies for both characters. Rather, these are the ones that I feel had the biggest influence on their most recent rematch. Appropriately enough, we're starting with the first ever scrapped Godzilla film, Bride of Godzilla. Don't know what's up with the question mark in the title. One thing I do know is that Bride of X is a very common title for horror movie sequels. I bet Bride of Frankenstein was the first thing that came to mind when I mentioned it. Although that is a very different animal than Bride of Godzilla. It was a proposed script to follow up from the events of the second movie, Godzilla Raids Again, and oh boy, this is a weird one. The plot revolved around a scientist, Dr. Shida, discovering Godzilla and Anguirus live in a hollow Earth environment. A hollow Earth filled with all kinds of not just prehistoric creatures like a giant Archaeopteryx, but mermaids too. Yeah. Naturally, a lot of these creatures start attacking the surface, prompting Shida to do something that, once again, I'm afraid you're gonna think I'm kidding when I describe it. He builds a giant robot in the likeness of his dead daughter to battle the monsters. Whether this means she would have been portrayed by a human actor without some kind of suit or not is unknown. Even her name wasn't decided on. Most fans just call her Robosume. Though the script does mention she's naked, so maybe the actress would have worn a flesh-colored leotard or bodysuit? Either way, it would have resulted in Robosume defeating Anguirus by breaking his jaw, along with the Archaeopteryx, which actually makes Godzilla attracted to her. Yes, really. Godzilla likes badasses, apparently. Of course, the honeymoon ends with Robosume going into a cave with Godzilla and self-destructing, so maybe Godzilla's the one who's not her type. Obviously, the Hollow Earth setting is something that made its way into the Monsterverse, which Kong has taken up residence in, but I couldn't help but notice something else that carried over into a couple other Toho movies. Anguirus getting his jaw broken King Kong style by a giant robot would of course happen again in Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla, but there's also the first act of the movie, where the Hollow Earth invasion of the surface would have started with giant insects attacking a small mining town before the bigger threat shows up, which is basically the first act of Rodan. Shida making a robot duplicate of his daughter, as well as another human-sized robot who has trouble interacting with other characters, that has shades of Katsura's arc from Terror of Mechagodzilla. Now, at the end of the day, this movie didn't get made, and instead the franchise was on ice for 7 years until King Kong vs. Godzilla. Speaking of which, this video simply wouldn't be complete if I didn't talk about Willis O'Brien's idea for a King Kong sequel, King Kong vs. Frankenstein. Despite the success of the original film, O'Brien was having trouble finding work for years, until coming up with the idea to bring back not just King Kong, but Frankenstein's monster as well. This movie would have revealed Kong survived his fall from the Empire State Building and was snuck back to Skull Island by Carl Denham from the first movie. I guess O'Brien didn't have Son of Kong and the destruction of Skull Island in mind when he wrote this. But his piece would have been interrupted by a creature made by a descendant of Dr. Frankenstein. This creature would have been stitched together from different animal parts, and at different points in the scripting process went by names of Frankenstein, Prometheus, and later Ginkgo. How much you want to bet those changes were made for legal reasons? Concept art for Ginkgo was made, and it kinda looks like a hairless Kong rather than the mismatch of different animals like the script implied. It also appears Denham arranged a boxing match between Kong and Ginkgo, implying Denham hadn't learned his lesson, despite being the one who brought Kong back to Skull Island in this script. I assume this would have been further revised in later drafts, not to seem so contradictory. Now, it may not seem like this has a lot in common with Godzilla vs. Kong, but remember, O'Brien's original ideas eventually developed into the original King Kong vs. Godzilla. If he didn't come up with this idea back in 1960, both Godzilla and Kong's franchises might have gone down very different directions. Ask yourself, would Godzilla vs. Kong even exist if not for this story treatment? It's a real shame that Universal producer John Beck sold the idea to Toho without telling O'Brien, who didn't even learn about the movie until it was already in Japanese theaters. He was one of the pioneers of special effects in film, and he was basically robbed of his comeback. It goes without saying, King Kong vs. Godzilla was a successful movie for Toho. In fact, it was the highest grossing movie in the franchise until 2016's Shin Godzilla. And given they still had the rights to make Kong films, a follow-up was a no-brainer. Titled Continuation, King Kong vs. Godzilla, this movie would have involved Kong taking in a human baby before real-world gorillas made it cool. When the baby is brought back to human civilization, Kong is quick to follow. Meanwhile, Godzilla's unconscious form washes ashore and becomes an attraction for an amusement park. And in a reversal of the previous film, the JSDF would have used electricity to revive Godzilla so he could fend off Kong's rampage. And ultimately would have ended with the two monsters vanishing in the chaos of an erupting Mount Aso. Which, strangely enough, also reminds me of Rodan. Would have been hilarious if the last shot of this unmade movie had Godzilla, Kong, and the Rodan couple playing poker inside the mountain. The most obvious takeaway from this unmade movie is, of course, Kong imprinting on and taking care of a small child. Of course, the script goes for a baby instead, but the kernel of that idea is still there. Now, as for why this movie never got made, funny story about that. This film was scrapped in favor of Toho making their own Godzilla vs. Frankenstein movie, which also never got made. So to recap, Willis O'Brien wanted to make a King Kong vs. Frankenstein film, which was ultimately made into King Kong vs. Godzilla. Then Toho wanted to make their own Godzilla vs. Frankenstein, which was scrapped in favor of a standalone Frankenstein movie, Frankenstein Conquers the World, which happens to have a deleted alternate ending involving a giant octopus that first appeared in King Kong vs. Godzilla. If you're disappointed it didn't show up in the real ending, don't worry, it reappears in the sequel, War of the Gargantuas.
Everybody got that?
This next movie on our list is Godzilla vs. King Kong, as in the unmade movie planned for 1991, not Godzilla vs. Kong released in 2021. I've made this needlessly confusing, haven't I? The thing behind this one again goes back to how much money Toho made off the original King Kong vs. Godzilla. While Godzilla vs. Biollante is a great movie and one of the highlights of the series, it didn't make much at the box office back in 1989. So, of course, another attempt at a Godzilla and Kong rematch was considered. This time around, the plot would have involved Kong falling for a human scientist who would later turn him into a cyborg, and no doubt that's where the idea for Mecha Ghidorah originated. Of course, this movie didn't get made because Toho was long past the point where they had the rights to make King Kong movies. At that point, Turner Entertainment held the rights. Sort of. King Kong has a long history of changing ownership of not simply the character, but also who owns the rights to different King Kong films, the merchandise, the spin-off books and comics, the theme park rides, all of those are by different people. And this is before you even consider that time Nintendo got thrown into the mix with Donkey Kong. Even swapping out Kong for Mechanic Kong was too close to the original for Turner's liking, so long story short, Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah and Godzilla vs. Mothra were made instead. Because at least Toho has the rights to use those characters. There are, of course, other ideas for unmade movies that made it into the MonsterVerse. Godzilla vs. Red Moon, for example, would have been a movie where Godzilla's goal was to stop two ugly monsters from mating, aka the plot to the 2014 Godzilla. Also, something called Gigamoth would have been involved in yet another script. I suspect that eventually evolved into the character Bactra. But that is getting into a much broader topic about all kinds of cool movie ideas that never saw the light of day. The good news is, they're not completely forgotten. Bride of Godzilla was adapted in an audio drama which I found on the Kaijusaurus podcast, and a translated plot synopsis of Continuation King Kong vs. Godzilla exists on Toho Kingdom's site. I hope you've enjoyed this look at various movies that inspired Godzilla vs. Kong, both the ones that made it on the big screen and the ones that never made it past the cutting room floor. Because I have. Which is why there's no doubt in my mind we'll be talking about these characters again in the future. They, along with the Transformers, are the most recurring series on my channel. As for my next topic... Whoa, hold on a second here. What day is it? Ooh, this video has been neglected for far too long, and it's almost time for the anniversary. Tell you what, folks, if you're still interested in seeing a Transformers anniversary video, let me know in the comments down below, and I'll have it done by the end of February. Until then, I'll see you in my next video. And don't worry, I won't make you wait as long for the next one as you had to wait for this one.